Ladies and gentlemen, will you please welcome to the stage the Redhead Bedhead herself, JoEllen Notte!
So we haven't had sex in years. A sentence I never pictured myself saying to my father over brunch in a bistro in Boston. But there it was. And what he said next horrified me, and then made me feel relieved, and then horrified me again. So it horrified me because I was talking about my sex life with my father, and it made me feel relieved because he listened to me. And then it horrified me again, and you'll understand why in a second. His response was, he was going through a divorce himself, his second, and his response was, yep, that's been a problem for us too. And it horrified me because he had been married for 25 years. And I realized that what he was saying was that this could go on for fucking ever. So that was when I pretty much knew I was out. I was moving on. Like, I did the counseling thing and all that stuff that you do, but really at that point, I started planning my life moving forward. And my dad was planning his. He was going to move up to Boston to live near me and my brother. So we kind of started planning together. And we were actually going to get an apartment. We were going to get like our bachelorette pad, which might sound weird, but my parents split when I was 3, so I'd never lived with my dad. And I was excited. So we spent that spring apartment hunting. That summer we found a place, and he sent his stuff up, and he would come up and he would visit his friends, and we'd go drink beer, and it was a good time. And finally his stuff was there, and I set the apartment up, and I'd send him down pictures, and his new life was there, and it was waiting, and he was so excited to start it. And then on September 3rd, 2011, my father died in a hospice in New Jersey because he waited too long to go get his new life, and cancer got him instead. At that moment, I said, fuck this. I'm not waiting anymore for my life. And then I also realized how much my father had kind of been my guidepost, my emotional true north, the thing I turned to steer me when I didn't know what was coming next. So about a week and a half after I lost him, I went and I got this tattoo. It's Italian, like my dad, and it says fidati. It means trust yourself. And yes, I'm sure. I checked it a lot, so it doesn't say like cheese or something. It really says trust yourself. Okay? And I put it there so I could read it, I could remember. And I set about living my new life. And for me, that meant I went out and I slept with half of Boston. Well, half of the men in Boston, so really like a quarter of Boston, but I slept with a lot of Boston. And so for me, that equaled fixing what had been wrong with my life. Because for me, always, sex had been this block, this thing I felt like I was on the outside of, right? Sex made me feel like, remember when you were about 13 and you'd go into the record store, because remember record stores? You'd go into the record store and the people behind the counter would be so much cooler than you were. Right? And you'd be just afraid to ask for what you were there for because you knew that they would sneer at you. Sex always felt to me like I knew nothing, everybody else knew everything, and I was like walking in asking for a Wilson Phillips single. So as far as I was concerned, I was fixing that problem. I was having all the sex. Problem solved. Also totally thought I was dodging any grief-related depression. So, I'm going merrily about my riding tour of Boston, and I'm in bed with a partner, and he notices the vibrator in my nightstand. And he says, I want to see you use that. Will you use that for me? And I froze. I couldn't do it. I wasn't sure why I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. And I couldn't talk to him about not being able to do it. I just couldn't do it. And that was kind of when I realized that I hadn't really changed anything. I was just having a lot of sex, which, while fun for me and the male population of Boston, you're welcome, wasn't really changing much. And then a bunch of stuff happened all in a row, because sometimes life works that way. Right around that time, I went into Good Vibrations, right? So for those of you who don't know, Good Vibrations is like the mothership of sex-positive retail. And they've got a whole bunch of shops in the San Francisco area, and very randomly, one in Boston, Massachusetts. And so I went in to buy lube. And I just picked up the only lube I had ever bought in my entire adult life. And the sales associate said to me, we really don't recommend this one much because it's got parabens and it's not really great for your body. And I did that thing that you do when you don't know stuff and you're afraid to admit you don't know stuff. I was just like, oh no, it's fine, it's cool, it's great, love it. Parabens are awesome. And, and I was walking towards the door and I had my hand on the door and I stopped. And I thought, well, okay. The problem is we don't know stuff, we being me. And we're self-conscious about that, and that's what's keeping us from moving forward. But if I ask right now, then I'd know stuff, and that would fix this. So I went back, and I had her explain the lube, and why that was bad, and what would be better, and she showed me a new one, and I bought that instead. And it was like I learned the simplest lesson anybody really, really needed to learn ever. That asking stuff teaches you stuff, and then you know stuff. Ta-da! Yes. So at the risk of sounding creepy, then I started hanging out at Good Vibrations. It was great. I started taking classes with names like The Art of the Female Orgasm and Fabulous Fellatio. And I found that this whole community existed. Whole world around talking about sex. And I got very excited. And I realized, I'd been looking for what was next for me. What was I going to do? What was I going to do with my life? I wanted to write. For God knows what reason, I thought I wanted to write historical fiction. And I had this epiphany, this realization. I realized that if I had been feeling lost and uncool and like sex didn't have a place for me, there were probably other people who felt that way too. And I could take this urge to write and all this learning I was doing, I could put them together, and I could, this terribly novel idea I had, write about sex on the internet. So I started my website. And when I started my website, it was like, I felt like I had discovered, I don't know, what I was, at the risk of sounding cliche, what I was meant to be doing, right? My whole life changed. I learned more and more all the time, and the effect that it had on my sex life was immediate, right? I learned that you could talk during sex. Legit did not know this before that. And so I started talking to my partners, and then my partners suddenly started saying things like, wow, that was really awesome. And I'd be like, thanks, I knew nothing 2 weeks ago. And I suddenly had a community of people who would teach me things when I asked, and who would commiserate with me about the things I didn't know and the things I was afraid of, and I'd opened this whole new world. It was amazing. And now, 4 years later, that world is my life, that world is my job. I get to travel all over the country and teach people, and I get to write and reach people all over the world through their computers. I get to tell people the things that I needed someone to tell me. I get to tell 5 years ago me that it's okay, that wherever you are is good, that there's a place for you, that you get to stand in your power, and you get to trust yourself. Thank you.